Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in Judges chapter 6. We're going to be continuing in verse 32 this lesson. Actually, we're going to be finishing chapter 6 this lesson. But before we begin, our theme verse for Lunch with the Lord is Jeremiah chapter 15, verse 16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, let's read verse 32. And it says here, therefore, on that day, he called him Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal plead against him, because he has thrown down his altar. So Gideon goes with his servants, casts down the altar. The men of the city, which are probably Canaanites and Jewish people, they're angry and they come to his father. His father now defends him. They want to kill him, but his father defends him and says, if Baal truly is a god, well then let Baal defend himself. And now in verse 32, it's a great blessing to be called a hater of false gods or a hater of idols. This is what they do with Gideon. They give him another name. Wear it as a badge of honor to be considered an enemy to ignorance and to superstition, because that's what it was. These people worshiping Baal, it was just ignorance and superstition that they were hiding behind. They didn't want the true God. They wanted to serve their own God. And they believed that Baal would bless their crops and bless their things and give them a wonderful life. But it was all superstition. It was all ignorance. But listen, wear it as a badge of honor to be considered an enemy to ignorance and an enemy to superstition. When a person becomes a new creature in Christ, it is normal to be given a new name by this world. Here's a couple of new names that you may be given. Not all of them, but here's a few. Well, number one is a nonconformist. Another name is antisocial. And another name would be narrow-minded. Oh yeah. So listen, if people at your work, people at school, people in your own home, your own family, they wanna call you nonconformist, antisocial, those kinds of things. Listen, wear that name as a badge of honor. Let's read verse 33. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and went over, and they pitched in the valley of Jezreel. Now, the enemy now comes across the Jordan River to strip the land of its food and other goods. Now, don't think that verse 33 is talking about them coming over to fight against Gideon. No, they're not. They're coming over. It's the time of the year now. They're coming over to strip the land of its food. They travel about 12 to 15 miles into the land of Manasseh. And they are only just a few miles from Gideon's town of Ophrah. Now, according to Judges chapter 8 and verse 12, there were at least 135,000 that came to raid the land. Where they crossed the Jordan River is not known, but being they were up north towards the Sea of Galilee, it may be possible that they crossed the Jordan River where the 2.5 tribes of Israel crossed the Jordan River many years before, and where they may have set up the altar of of God, so where the altar to God. Remember, they called the altar Ed, and that altar was to be a witness between the tribes on the east and the tribes on the west. Remember, you had the 2.5 tribes at the end of Joshua, the last chapter or 2 of Joshua. The 2.5 tribes cross over the Jordan River, and they go into their land on the east side of the Jordan River. And they crossed it, probably they crossed it up north towards the Sea of Galilee. And that's where these more than likely, that's where these Midianites are coming from, the north side up towards the Sea of Galilee. They're crossing the Jordan River. And again, it's possible that they crossed at the same place, because you're going to cross where there's not a lot of water, where it's easy to cross. By now, this altar that the children of Israel built, the 2.5 tribes built years ago, it may have been destroyed by the oppressors that God had allowed to come against Israel. These enemies come to the land because it is harvest time. This is the reason why Gideon was threshing wheat. When we see in beginning of chapter 6, we saw that Gideon was threshing wheat at the winepress. Why was he doing it? He was doing it because it's harvest time. The wheat was probably just a few days into its ripeness, and Gideon was going to get as much as possible before these raiding groups came. Once they sweep through the land, there will be not much left. There were probably other children of Israel out threshing as much as they could and hiding it also. Don't think that Gideon was out there threshing wheat at the winepress and he was the only one of the children of Israel in all the land that was threshing wheat. No. There were other people threshing wheat. They're trying to get in as much as possible before the Midianites and Amalekites come through the land and take it all. But the children of Israel had cried unto the Lord. And when they cry unto the Lord, it means the end of the oppressor. I've said it before in these lessons on Judges. I'll say it again. The oppression always continues until the children of Israel cry unto the Lord. Whether it's 1 year, 7 years, or 17 years, it doesn't matter. As soon as they humble themselves and they cry unto the Lord to release them from this oppression, then God delivers them. That's when the oppressor's rule over them is over. Now let's read verse 34. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezer was gathered after him. Now, the Spirit of God comes upon Gideon, and he blows this trumpet in order to gather the troops. Now listen, this is interesting. The Abiezerites were his own kindred. And they are the first ones to respond. Now, just last lesson, listen, they were probably convicted of their sin of idolatry and seeing that no harm came to Gideon from Baal. So therefore, they decide to stand with Gideon against these raiders. So just last lesson, they want to kill Gideon because of what he did, and Joash, his father, challenges them and says, look, if Baal's a god, let him defend himself. And so they were all up in arms that Gideon, tore down their idolatry, their idol to Baal. But now, when he blows the trumpet, the very first ones, the Abiezerites. Oh yeah, they got convicted in their heart. And they probably realize Baal's not worth worshiping. Now, Gideon's reformation actually affected his people. You know, listen to this. When we stand up for Christ in our daily life, there will be those whose lives will be convicted by our walk with God. And they will give up their foolish idols for the living God. The daily example that we live will cause a tearing down of their idols. Some will respond, but sad to say, most will not respond. As we're a testimony at work or wherever we go, as we're a testimony unto God, our life causes the idols in people's hearts to be torn down. And some will respond and come to Christ. Most won't. Most will hate you for exposing their idol as worthless. Verse 35, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also was gathered after him. And he sent messengers unto Asher, and unto Zebulun, and to Naphtali. And they came up to meet him. They came up to meet them. Now, Gideon sends messengers to the neighboring tribes around Manasseh that would also have been greatly affected by the Midianite oppression. They also would have had their land stripped of the food and cattle and things. These other three nations are to the north of the valley of Jezreel. But the very next nation to the south was Ephraim. And Gideon did not call them. Gideon did not call the Ephraimites, the ones to the south. He only called the nations to the north. This was a cause of great anger that they had with Gideon. We're going to see that in chapter 8 in verse 1. You're going to see that the Ephraimites, they get angry at Gideon because he didn't call them to this battle. Now, from chapter 7, we see that 32,000 men will respond from Gideon's call. But what is 32,000 against 135,000? Now let's read verses 36 through 40. And he says here, and Gideon said unto God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I will put a fleece of wool in the floor, and if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry on the earth, beside then shall I know that thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. For he rose up early in the morning, and thrust the fleece together, and wringed the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. And Gideon said, he said unto God, let not your anger be hot against me, and I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, by this once that the fleece, let it be now dry only upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night, for it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew on the ground. Now, Gideon is now going to put out this fleece to God for God to reconfirm his call to Gideon. Fleeces are put out by people who usually lack the faith to trust God at his word. If I receive, for example, if I receive a letter in the mail today, or if it rains in the afternoon, or if I get a text from a certain person, some fleeces can be very general fleeces. And some can be very specific. God, I want it to rain this afternoon, but it's got to be at 4 o'clock. If it rains at 4 o'clock, then I know you want me to do what you called me to do. And some can be general, some can be specific. But putting out fleeces is not what the Bible teaches as far as knowing what God's will is. You may ask, well, then what is the Bible's method of knowing what God's will is? Well, the answer is actually the answer is given by Gideon himself. In verses 36 and 37, listen, in verses 36 and 37, 2 times, Gideon reminded God of what God had already said to Gideon. Yeah, he reminds God of what God has already said to him. When God says something in his word, then that's all we need. That is God's will. When God puts it out plain in his word, what his will is, then that's God's will. We don't need to set out fleeces if it's God's will or not, because it is. Putting out fleeces reveals that we do not believe his word. It is also an act of pride because we want God to do what we want him to do rather than to simply believe his word. We need to understand that God is under no obligation whatsoever to fulfill our fleeces. But, listen, if you do put out a fleece to God and God answers it, then you better do it. If God puts out a fleece and he answers it, you better do that fleece. Now, give you an example. Many years ago, a few years after I got saved, great man of God, I'm not going to name any names, but this is back in the late 1970s, probably 1978, 79. I got saved in 1975, so it was just a couple of years. Great man of God, he and his father and mother, they started coming to our church, and they were on fire for God. They loved God. And the father was kind of sickly. The mother, she was at home, taking home at home. And the one son, he stayed at home and he had a job. But and he and I, the son, he and I, we had great times together. I would go over to his house and he'd play the piano and I'd play the guitar and we'd play these old hymns. And we'd sing for an hour or two. And we had a great time. And it was a great encouragement to me, for both of us. We enjoyed singing the old hymns together at his house. And I remember he always listened to a certain preacher on the radio, and this preacher had a Bible college, and he wanted. In his heart, he really wanted to go to that Bible college. Now, whether he wanted to be a pastor or not, I don't know. But he wanted to go to the Bible college and spend a couple of years there. And over time, he was getting edgy and itchy, and he really wanted to go, and he really wanted God to answer. And he said, I can still remember it. He's told us, me and some other friends of mine, he told us that he was at work one day. And he prayed to God, and he said, God, when I get home from work, if there's a letter in the mail and it's telling me to go to Bible college, then I'll go. I'll go. Then I'll know it's from you. Well, he got home And sure enough, there was a letter from a guy from from our church, another tremendous man of God. He went to Bible college up in upstate New York, and he went there, and we were all friends together. And he wrote a letter. He wrote a letter to this other guy, the guy that I'm talking about. He wrote a letter to him, and it arrived that day. And when he got home from work, he opened up the letter. And it was all about encouraging him to, possibly go to Bible college. So here, this man's fleece, he put it out. God answered. But you know what? He never went. He never went. And his life is he saved? Yes, he's saved. But is he on fire for God anymore? No, he's not on fire for God. He's a great man, and I every time I think of him, it's a shame. It's a shame. He should have gone. He put the fleece out to God. God answered the fleece, and he never went. And I'm not going to get into any details as why he didn't go, but he never went. And since that time, his life with God was not as fervent, not as strong as it was before. And this is why I tell you, if you put out a fleece unto God and he answers it, you better do it. Don't give excuses. Don't even think about giving God excuses why you can't go, why you can't do it, especially when he answers your fleece. In this instance here in Judges, God did choose to heed to Gideon's request, even though it would delay the battle for another 2 days. All right? Now, we're going to continue in chapter 7 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.